Hey, good morning to those of you out there on the West Coast. Good afternoon to those of you here on the East Coast with me. I'm excited to get started again with live training. I just took a little time off and focused on some other things. You should be getting sound for people who said there was no sound. I actually wasn't talking, so don't worry. Once I start talking, there's all sorts of sound. I'm excited to get started on the training. Before we started, though, I like giving tips for success to those of you showing up early and on time. It really makes these LinkedIn Lives go well, and it alerts other people to their training today and say, hey, come on out and join us. So today I want to just give you a tip. Say, go buy this book, Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. And you can either buy the book or just listen to me. And when I tell you what the overall purpose of the book is, or the point of the book is, digging your well before you're thirsty is, think about it from teammates' perspective. If you're trying to go after a particular contract opportunities and you know that you do this particular type of work, let's say you're in construction, you're a painter, you would want to be teaming with people who do framing or electrical or whatever, right? If you're in cybersecurity, maybe you want to team with somebody who's doing risk management framework because you do other types of cyber. Well, don't wait till the very last minute as you're building your team, et cetera, to develop those relationships. Digging your well before you're thirsty being needing somebody on your team, means be building those networks, finding those companies you like, finding those employees you would love to hire, and engaging with them long before you need them. That way you've got those established relationships, and when the time comes to hire somebody or to bring them onto your team, you've already got them in place. Of course, we know to do that in the federal market with our customers. That's called BD, but also do this throughout your teaming environment and do this with employees that are out there. Okay, we're going to get rocking and rolling on today's training. I just want to make sure my tech's all good to go. And I should be sharing my screen. We're going to be talking about the government shutdown, potential shutdown, et cetera. And I figured coming back that I would start with this training because it's the questions I get asked, right? People are asking about certain things through September and August. It was end of the year spending. Now we're worried about the government shutdown and will there be a shutdown? Won't there be a government shutdown? Right here's my $5 on the square that says, I don't think there's going to be a shutdown. I think they're going to push really hard to try to do it at the end. But if there is going to be a shutdown, what do we do? Well, that's what I want to talk about. Before I go into the meat, though, of today's training, I just wanted to help you put your mindset or your mind where it should be to be able to survive things like this. I have a very upbeat, positive attitude when I deal with any kind of situation. And it comes from really, I think, being influenced and mentored by people like Thomas Paine. And by the way, if you don't know this, Thomas Paine is back from like 1776, that time frame, forming of this country. And he wrote, in fact, I've got his book here as well. It's another book. I read a ton of history on, especially the Revolutionary period where the country was being formed. A lot of ups and downs back then, but the overall formation of the country is fantastic. And this country is very strong. But Thomas Paine talked about when he was trying to sway Americans towards independence and breaking away from Britain, all this kind of stuff. He was talking about these are the times that try men's souls. And he wrote a book called Common Sense and a whole bunch of other papers that laid out the crisis before America. And I just love this paragraph. And I thought I'd start with this in today's training. He wrote, these are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from service of his country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of the men and women of the country. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered, yet we have this consolation with us that the bigger the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. And the reason I love that, I happened to be reading that as I was getting ready to do this training, is that you are the backbone of America. There's this, sometimes I hear people say this, and I don't know if they truly understand the statement that they're saying, that small businesses are the backbone of America. The reason I do what I do is because government contractors are able to pull this large amount of money from the federal government through contracts. And when they do, they spend that locally. They hire locally. They hire primary sector jobs, secondary sector jobs. They then spend that money locally, and their employees spend that money locally. So there's secondary sets of benefits that come from that, whether it's sales tax to pay for the police force or teachers, or whether there's pizza parlors and movie theaters that need more people hired. All that activity happens because small businesses do what they do. And I just want you to remember, as you're worried about, is there going to be a government shutdown? Is there not going to be a government shutdown? That the government's not going away. You're not going away. You are the backbone. And if you can just remember that going through some of these troubles, if you're able to go through this, these are the people, these are the businesses that grow the strongest. Anybody can grow when things going great. It's can you grow when they're a little difficult? That's the stuff that really tells us who we are. So in today's training, I'm going to cover down, I'm not trying to be a lawyer on this. I'm not trying to come at it from a financing perspective. I'm a business owner, right? And now I am a coach and a trainer, but I spent 20 years teaching, being a small business owner. I've been through this before, and I'm just going to give you some tips that I have. So I want to talk about what the shutdown is. I really want you to understand the circle of influence, where you can have impact and where you really have no impact. And then for those of you who have government contracts, I'm going to give you some tips. Here's some tips that I would take as we move forward. And then finally, I want to just let everybody know if we are going into a shutdown, here's steps all of us, people with contracts and without, can take. So I'm not able to see the chat. So as we move forward, I will look at that. If you have questions, go ahead. But I want to drive through the training first. And see, Sir Gus, if you're online, if you can just text me really quick to make sure I'm all audio good. Okay, if you don't know who I am, my name is Neil McDonnell. I'm the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to my federal sales training where I provide tips for success in the federal market. I spent 20 years as a small business owner in the federal market, and since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret, it's just a process. In fact, I lay out the 7-step process here that I teach every day. When you follow a process A to Z, you're going to have repeatable, predictable results. That's why I do this training, because that's what I want you to have, repeatable, predictable results. Some of you have already done this, and thank you very much. Go ahead and put your company name and core competency into the chat. Use 2 or 3 words to describe your core competency, not whole paragraphs or something. Make it easy. By the way, if you don't know this, in chats on social media, we only read really fast snippets. So if you've got a lot to say, just break it up into multiple chats. But when you put a block of text, we tend to move on. Our eyes just move on to the next easier thing to read. Also, remember, I'm doing training, but the big value that comes from this, in addition to the training and the skills that I teach you, is the community that we have built. Engage with each one of the folks out there. Really engage with everybody. Remember, dig your well before you're thirsty, but certainly engage with people who are in the same space as you, and be a giver. Let other people know that you're open to connections. All right, let's dive into first just understanding from a high level, what is the government shutdown, right? This is my take on what the government shutdown is, but fundamentally, it's Congress not doing their job. And this is nothing new. Anybody who's been in government contracting in particular, right? Theoretically, all citizens should be aware what's happening in the federal government, but those of us who are in the federal market selling to the federal government, we know this. Congress is constantly passing continuing resolutions, et cetera. And what that means is, hey, we couldn't do our job, so we're just going to sit there and keep the budget the way it is and keep moving it forward. So if there's going to be a shutdown, it's because Congress failed to create or pass a budget, and they also failed to pass a continuing resolution, which basically means, hey, let's give ourselves 90 more days or 30 more days to keep working this out. And the reason this is happening, right, I just want us to talk about it and then move on, but it's because the House, right, the representatives in Congress, they're fighting among themselves. They can't get along. They can't figure it out. They can't get a budget agreed to among themselves. And then the Congress is made up of the House and the Senate. Those two will fight among themselves this week and going forward. If they don't pass a budget or continuing resolution, this week, they're fighting among themselves. There's things the Senate wants, the House wants. It's interesting to know these things, but as you'll see in a minute, it doesn't really matter because we can't do anything about it. That's just what it is. But one thing I really wanted you to understand is that when the government shuts down, when there's a shutdown in the federal market, it means that some of the areas that they spend money on, they won't spend money there anymore. They'll either have to stop it completely or they'll have issues. You'll hear people talking about, whether it's critical work that you're doing or not critical work. I actually built a whole business focusing more on VA and DOD because I knew that they would be impacted the least by federal shutdowns, et cetera. But what I want you to take away from just understanding about the government shutdown, it is not just impacting us. It's impacting the people who are doing the work with you. So if you're supporting a program office, an agency or a command within the military, if you're supporting somebody, they have the same concerns as you do. The government's shutting down. Oh, are we going to get furloughed? Are we going to have to get unpaid leave in the government? What's all the impact? There was this great book that you'll see me talk about in a minute. And I don't know if you'd see this, but I like holding things up. That book was 7 Habits for Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. And one of the habits is seek first to understand, then to be understood. When you go talk to the government, whoever you're going to talk to, because I'm going to tell you to talk to certain people, when you go talk to them, remember that they're feeling anxious as well about the shutdown. Are they going to have to, not come into the office? Are they going to have to work without pay? They have kids in daycare. They have car payments and house payments. They have the exact same challenges we have if our money stops flowing and their money stops flowing. So just keep that in mind as you go forward, and they'll really appreciate it, right? It'll come across that you actually realize you're both in the same boat and you're just trying to figure out, how do we survive? How does everybody survive? So I mentioned Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. And early on, I was talking about, what is the shutdown? Well, one of the things to keep in mind is most of the shutdown is in your circle of concern, this big outer circle. The outer circle of concern are these things that pop into your mind like, man, we need to pass a budget. You're concerned about the budget being passed, right? But you have no influence. Frankly, like only 435 people really have influence, but you have no influence, none at all, to be able to change the federal budget being passed or not passed. Whether the government shuts down or not is a concern of yours, but there's not a thing you can do about it. You can't call your congressional representative or your senator and express concern or worry. They already know. They already know they need to pass a budget. Doesn't matter what side they're on. They all know they need to pass a budget. Now they're just figuring it out. Well, you're not part of that conversation. So whether the budget passes or not is in your circle of concern. And what I want you to do is spend far less time in your circle of concern, because that hurricane that's 2 weeks off, that's out in the middle of the Atlantic or something, and it may or may not hit land, that's a circle of concern. As it gets closer to us and we know where it's going to hit landfall, that hits your circle of influence. Circle of influence, and